Leveling. It has not been in the best state these days, but thankfully this is something that players and Blizzard are in alignment over. I mean, just listen to game director Ian Hazzikostas' words.
Leveling needs help. We've floated the idea of a level squish. What if instead of going to 120, you went to 60 again, but every single one of those levels gave you something? Getting back to a place where levels truly matter.
So look, we all agree, something needs to be done. Blizzard have floated the idea of a leveling squish, something that would make, say, level 60 be the max level of the game once more. It's a topic of debate within the team, and a topic that they have directly asked for feedback on. So, let's give them what they want. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Warcraft video. So yeah, leveling in World of Warcraft. The scaling system, in my view, fixed most of the gameplay issues, actually almost all of them, but it revealed a deeper problem, and that is the lack of reward. You see, World of Warcraft was designed to have such a high number of levels at the time where classes had between 51 and 71 talent points, meaning the players would get a new talent point for every level they achieved. And that created a constant sense of character progression. Now, Mists of Pandaria stripped this away, replacing it with the Diablo 3-like talent system that we actually know of today. Thing is, it only had a few levels, and that massively reduced the number of talent points that could be given to players as rewards. And this created a problem where leveling up felt very unrewarding, especially once the pace of leveling slows down later on, and especially for Battle for Azeroth, where it was combined with a particularly potent loss of character power due to the ratings change that normally happens, the loss of artifacts, and the loss of legendaries. Blizzard know this is a problem. They're not happy about it, and as you heard from this video's introduction, they want to fix it. One solution that they have tabled is the idea of a leveling squish, and you can see why it's alluring initially. You look at the characters, you realize that between the mount unlocks and the 7 talent points, there's barely anything to give characters, so you think, well, what if there was fewer levels to spread it all between? I mean, that would give you a higher proportion of levels that would come with a reward. And yeah, you can see how that would sort of make sense, but here's the thing. It would not work in reality. Don't worry, I have my own solutions to present once we're done sort of debunking the level squish. Because here's the thing, even with 60 levels, 50 of them being talent levels, 7 talent points is a small number for 50 levels, so the same problem would basically still exist. Plus, levels are more than a number. Sure, they could have a lower number of levels, but unless they halved leveling time, we would still have the exact same problem in terms of character progression per hour. There are frankly more criticisms here, but I think that these are the two that just leave it dead in the water as an idea, and that's without us talking about how level just feels intrinsic to your character far more so than, say, damage numbers. So, now that we've debunked the idea of doing a level squish, we're left with 7 talent points, a few unlocks for mounts, and 120 levels to squeeze them into. Yeah, you know what, I can see how this is a very uncomfortable position for Blizz to be in. Here's the thing, World of Warcraft characters are designed more like MOBA or Diablo characters in terms of their mechanical progression. The progression has been boiled down to a small number of high-impact, exciting decisions rather than a slow slog that felt kinda good most of the time, and especially over time. Of course, MMOs are quite slow by their nature, so really the latter's fit, I'd say, was a more natural fit for WoW leveling. And that's the fundamental thing here, and it's going to split us in 2 different directions. These 2 directions are best explained through talking about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic reward systems. In video games, an intrinsic reward, that's something like the feeling of winning a match, or the reward feeling of becoming more skilled at a game, while an extrinsic reward system is something like unlocking a new cosmetic set, weapon skin, or badge. Now, of course, that's to you, but what about your character? Well, I'd say that an intrinsic reward to your character is something like a talent point, while an extrinsic reward to your character is something like a bit of gear or a transmog set. Vanilla World of Warcraft was all about intrinsic character rewards, and I think that's why the talents were so successful in spite of their pitfalls. In modern WoW, we see more rewards that are extrinsic. They are bolt-ons to your character, such as legendaries and Azerite, and while those things are immediately very gratifying, they feel disposable, and that leads players to have less attachment with their characters. Now, while the extrinsic reward loop is in full sway at maximum pace, it feels great. But as the end of Legion to BFA period highlights, especially with the leveling, It just shows you how bad it feels to lose those extrinsic rewards and how it really has a glass-shattering effect on the player's attachment to their character's progression. I mean, that Legion to BFA launch period, as highlighted again by the leveling, it does show us how deep the lows that are created by such a system are, and I do believe that is something that has caught the designers at Blizzard by surprise. So there are two fixes to this problem. I am totally down for the intrinsic fix, but there is an extrinsic system that could fix the immediate problem. First, the Intrinsic Solutions. Number one is having characters have a spec-independent unlock tree based on class. I'm just going to call it the perk tree. So what are perks? Well, quite simply, they are more utility-themed rewards around your class that focus on outdoor content. While slight balance concerns may arise here, look, we cannot balance the entire of World of Warcraft around guilds who are willing to faction and race change their entire roster to be better to raid. Of course, no shade to Limit, but we can't balance around them. Blizzard would see multiple benefits from this. First, they could add more diversity between the classes and enhance class diversity without having cascading throughput and balancing problems as much over the long life of the game. Second, by being more exploration and world focused, these would have a more tangible impact on the day-to-day use of one's character. You would simply make a bunch of perks, you'd maybe have some of them be, you know, one perk, others be maybe 5 ranks deep, and you'd put them in a tree of some sort. That could easily give Blizzard 50 more ways to reward players as they level, and then a way of also making each one of the classes feel more unique. So you'd likely have more generic style perks across classes, things like, you know, your self-healing in world content, some sort of movement-related mechanic, things like that. I mean, hell, some of them could basically just be scrapped talent ideas that are nice to have but weren't competitive. They could be worked back into a system like this, especially in the non-raid utility front. But yeah, you'd have that bucket of things. You'd then have what I'm going to call signature world abilities. Think about your champion abilities from Legion or the building abilities from Warlords of Draenor. Stuff that's super powerful in the world, ideally giving maybe players a choice between 1 out of 3 for, you know, based on each class. We would then also have class fantasy specific signature perks. These would be the kind of things that are more focused on how a class interacts with the world, and the unique ways in which a class would do that. You know, things like maybe a hunter perk that unlocks a new class of rare beast to tame throughout the world, maybe a shaman unlocking the ability to find and bargain with elementals in a zone, giving them a strong buff or effect depending on the elementals of that zone. There could be very world and location focused perks to unlock. These are the sort of things that would likely feel great while leveling, and I've tried to stay generic and non-specific here because the design space is highly variable. So to what degree would Blizzard be okay with affecting combat? Is it acceptable to have things that are only active in non-instanced content? Is that a distinction that Blizzard are okay with? Is it really bad if a character loses their world content buffs once they go into an instance? Those parameters are the sort of thing for Blizzard to decide, but the point here is rather simple. If they are locked down to their current talents, but want to benefit from character progression per level, they need to do something like this. There's not much else they can do. Now, if breaking the current talents is okay, you could do a bit more. I could actually advocate for a hybrid system of talents and prime talents. Here's kind of a mock-up. So the idea would be that core talents, like the today ones, would still exist, but between them, there would be a number of smaller talents that accomplish similar things to the multi-rank talents of old. Now, prime talents would be unlocked at the current level brackets, and regular talents would be unlocked at a rate of, you know, maybe 1 every 2 levels outside of that for a total of like, I don't know, 7 prime talents and like 53, 55 regular talents. Now, if these were on 2 different like tracks beside each other, then this would be quite simple, but they could also put them all on 1 track with each prime talent tier being unlocked after purchasing all of the regular talents in its tier, and then, you know, the tier maxing out with the regular talents and then unlocking the prime talent for you and then bumping you on to the next one. Basically, you'd have like 15 places within a tier where talent points could go, but you'd only be able to spend like, say, 10, and then you'd unlock the prime talent and move on to the next rank. Now that sounds really messy to explain, but this is the sort of thing that could feel super intuitive if the right type of UI was used. So I think that's us covered insofar as intrinsic rewards go. As you can see though, these are far harder to implement, and they do have more cascading effects on the rest of the game over time, and that is likely why Blizzard have not chosen to implement something like this, even though they probably know it would be a good fix. Now, if Blizzard want an experience expedient fix to their symptoms, but not necessarily the core problem, they could add rewards that are extrinsic in nature. And there are many ways to do this. The most simple one is just to give people a box of loot every time they level, like a Paragon chest every time you ding. That would give you some gold and some rewards from a pool with maybe some bad luck protection. Ideally based on, say, the class for the sake of replayability. Maybe, gear that looks good for transmog and is useful for leveling, stuff like that. And yeah, I know that's really simple, but if all the Blizzard wants is to have a big, bing bing, wahoo, a flash of light, I click the button, it opens up, I get some stuff. If that's all they want, I mean, this system would do that and would do it pretty quickly. And the gold rewards could maybe scale such that if you're leveling an alt, but you have a max level character, you'd earn a little bit more money. That could keep it feeling good for the existing players, but of course would have to be balanced very carefully indeed, or else, my friend Preach might break the entire economy next time a leveling bug appears. Jokes aside, that's the very basic version of that could be done super quickly, like in the next patch. Now, World of Warcraft has many diverse continents, many different classes, and they have diverse themes. So let's bring those things together and have unique armor sets for each one of the game's leveling brackets. An Old World set, an Outland one, a Wrath one, a Cataclysm one, a Pandaria one, a Draenor one, a Legion one, a BFA one. Doing these things on a per-class basis would be completely insane in terms of workflow, so it's only realistic for them to be able to do this based on armor types, so, plate, mail, leather, cloth, and even at that, it's a bit of a stretch. Now, these would either come for the aforementioned boxes, or they would be a direct reward somehow shown in the leveling UI. Now, these would actually drop at a strong level of power throughout the leveling bracket, and the final piece of the armor would maybe unlock 10% before the end of the bracket, so you actually get to use the whole set for a while together, and then you maybe get a final reward for completing the leveling bracket, maybe a unique expansion-themed mount. Now, having these things vary between characters is extremely important, because this system would accomplish nothing if, Bob with his one warlock logs in and suddenly has all the new rewards and doesn't get anything new when he levels a new character. Now, the ideal fix is that you'd quite literally just have loads of different sets per class. But let's be real, doing that at a good level of quality, absurd. There's no way they could do that, and totally fair. Now, if you have armor types, you still have problems, like maybe leveling a paladin after a warrior would not feel as rewarding, but that could be the most realistic way to get this idea out there, and maybe Blizzard could give different tints to different classes, something like that. So this would give you more rewards while you level, but they would actually have a longer lasting feeling of reward because they would be unlocked as transmogs, so it would at least give it a feeling of permanence. So that is two pathways towards fixing the current level reward problem in World of Warcraft, and the reasons why a leveling squish simply would not accomplish Blizzard's goals. Thing is though, this can all be taken far, far further. You know those boxes of loot at the end of leveling? Let's just have the leveling bar not stop once you hit 120. Much like with other games, have it just fill up whenever you do stuff and throw a Paragon box reward at players once they filled up their leveling bar, and maybe have a few milestone rewards for how many Paragon levels you get. Look, Artifact Power attempts to do the same thing, but in being so tied to player power, it's a prison, not a reward. Now, if we're doing that, why not have a Guild Wars 2-like mastery system? You see, in Guild Wars 2, they have an infinitely refilling leveling bar once you hit the endgame, and it actually grants you mastery points, which can be put into fun perks. Now, there are loads of perks based on your class, but also ones based on the zones of Guild Wars 2, and other mechanics like their mounts and their gliders. So, Blizzard, why not embrace the diversity of your zones and your world, have unique perks for the different zones and continents? Why not embrace the fun of gliders and turn them into a reward, maybe different perks for your gliders so they could work differently? And if they do something like that successfully, they could escape the trap of just having to squeeze power progression to the point where they ruin it. And spoiler alert, Blizz, you guys are kind of ruining power progression right now because you're leaning on it so heavily for the feeling of reward and satisfaction in your game. But hey, you know what? I'm having fun here, so let's do a little bit more. Let's make leveling more fun. This is so easy. This is called the Defenders of Azeroth. They're a new cross-faction group dedicated to crushing the evils around the planet. They tie into a new system called World Events. Now, these World Events spawn in to the game's leveling zones, and they would be designed very similarly to the original Legion invasions of the Legion pre-patch. Okay, they would range from that level of madness to being a little bit more low-key. It would fit the zone. These would be fantastic in that they would bring out old enemies and give us zone-specific little storylines that add just more enemy and zone diversity to regular gameplay. They'd be great for leveling XP, they would drop cosmetic rewards relating to the theme of the zone and the enemy, and they would drop currency for the Defenders of Azeroth faction, who would have bases in Stormwind and Orgrimmar, and would have an array of rewards, including mounts, pets, toys, and consumables that are super focused on your power in the world. Totally OP stuff that is fun as hell for blasting through world quests. The Defenders of Azeroth would then also serve as a way to add unique narrative quest content that really does not have to be in relation to the current storyline at all. This would allow Blizzard to increase the patch diversity by telling unique stories whenever they feel like it, with maybe traditionally less seen characters, and it would be a fantastic way for them to tease future plot threads. Perhaps they could maybe have a weekly Call to Arms dungeon, which would scale up one of the game's existing dungeons to maybe the level of a Mythic plus 5. Sure, the balance wouldn't be perfect, but you know what? It would probably feel a lot better than the time walking level of difficulty. As you can see, so much could be done with a faction like this that is designed around the entire of Azeroth and world content. And if they do this, content development could be done that would not have to be thrown into the bin with the next expansion's release. And that is something that massively hurt the BFA to Legion transition. So there you go, that's how I'd fix the leveling reward problem that World of Warcraft currently faces, plus a bunch of other design ideas that I've wanted to throw out for a while. Please let me and Blizzard know what you think about everything you heard in this video, and also your own ideas. The more of that, the better. It's what I would love to see, it's what Blizz would love to see, so let's do it, let's get creative, and let's talk about how we can solve all of these different problems. So, that's been it for me. Let me know what you think down below, and with that, I'll see you next time.